Hello everybody. I'll just repeat again, I'm so grateful to be here and grateful to be speaking to so many esteemed colleagues globally. My name's Victoria Rayner. I work closely with the IFIP and I look at inclusion from a slightly different angle. So my specialism is safeguarding and child protection. So I look at those children that are often marginalised because of experiences of abuse and neglect, either in the home, in the community, or sometimes actually within school from peer to peer. Now, some conversations that I'd been having with IFIP historically was that there was this misunderstanding, this misconceptualization of what safeguarding is in conjunction with child protection. So lots of countries across the world have child protection services. When a child is in danger or if harm has come to a child, there are often, not always, but there are often mechanisms in place which allow services to step in and act in the best welfare of children. My specialism and my area of real passion is safeguarding children. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about what is the difference between safeguarding and child protection. And in that inclusion arena, children that are being abused and neglected don't learn well. We know this. We know this from research around adverse childhood experiences, that children that have dealt with trauma need to be dealt with in the classroom inclusively and with a trauma-informed approach. So I really liked this quote by Bishop Desmond Tutu, that there comes a point where we need to stop pulling people out of the river and we need to go upstream and find out why they are falling in. And this works really well in what I'm trying to talk about today in regards to child protection is what happens when we pull children out of the river. Safeguarding happens when we stop them falling in. So how do we protect children from falling in the river in lots and lots of different ways? So if we could flick on a little bit. So safeguarding and child protection sit really closely together, and child protection and those mechanisms for protecting children sit as part of a safeguarding agenda. When we talk about safeguarding, we talk about all of the things that we do and the things that we have in place that prevent children from coming to harm. Now, that will look different in different contexts, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the UK context today and what happens in schools, what happens in education, the things that we do to safeguard children, to stop them falling in the river. We're going to talk about that in the same context as child protection, in regards to, we know that the child protection services globally are not the same. We know that everybody has a different level of service that they get for their children. And we know that in some places that is really, really well developed, it's really well integrated, and it talks to other systems. So we have in the UK, we have child safeguarding children boards. So the police, health, social care all sit together talking about how they can best protect children. Now, I'm talking about the UK because that's where I am the most established in regards to understanding that. But safeguarding is a concept that can globally talk across the world, particularly when we put it into that quote from UNESCO about inclusion being a philosophy, not a set of actions. And safeguarding really has that similar philosophy. Safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. Everybody can act to safeguard children. And if one part of the cog in the machine doesn't work with safeguarding, it means that we have to act for those in a child protection way much more quickly than we would if we were preventative. So prevention is better than cure, we know that. And it's around safeguarding children is better than having to protect them when something has happened to them. Now, it's important for me to be really clear here that we cannot ever eradicate risk entirely. It's around how do we mitigate risk. We know from research what children are at risk of, and we know that if we know the things that they are facing, we know what the risks are, then we can act to mitigate and reduce the effects of those risks. So I'm talking specifically today about children who experience abuse, children who experience neglect, children who have experiences at home or in the community or in school that are adverse, that can create trauma, that can stop them learning in the classroom. So this really is where that dovetail of child protection and inclusion comes into play. And this is what I'm particularly interested in, is those children in the classroom who are really de-schooled because they've got too much trauma to be able to deal with what's going on in the classroom. So if we could flick on, Jonathan, that'd be great, thank you. So safeguarding is the action that is taken to promote the welfare of children and protect them from harm. So linking into the previous presentation, that could be around social and emotional aspects of learning. It could be around protecting children from abuse and maltreatment, preventing harm to health or development, ensuring children grow up with the provision of safe and effective care. So that's care at home, it's care in the community, and it's care when they're in school, that the adults that they have access to are doing all of the things to protect, to prevent, and to ensure that effective care is happening. And taking action to enable all children and young people have the best outcomes. So safeguarding is really about building the foundations for safety. It's about putting the helmet on, it's about clipping the harness in to make sure that when we put our children into these learning situations, that they're best placed to be able to learn really effectively. So if we could flick on one more, please. In the context of child protection does sit as part of that safeguarding process, because we need to know that it's there as a contingency. We need to know that if safeguards fail and our children do experience abuse and neglect, then it focuses on protecting those individual children identified as suffering or likely to suffer significant harm or death in some cases. Safeguarding is about all children. So earlier on there was a quote about we teach in an inclusive way. So if we teach everyone with inclusion, nobody will ever miss out. There will be nobody that will not benefit from being taught in an inclusive classroom. And it's the same with safeguarding. Safeguarding is for every child. We prevent the harm coming to every child. Child protection is for those individual children who are more likely to suffer significant harm. So I'm going to give you some examples now of what safeguarding means in a really practical context. So when we think about safeguarding, you will recognise in your own settings lots of things that you do every day that you do to protect children. So you make sure that the classrooms that you teach in are safe, that there are no hanging wires, that children can't walk into a classroom and physical, or I would hope, physical harm would come to children by, electrics being exposed and things like that. So as teachers, when you create a safe space in your classroom, you are safeguarding the physical state of the child. Attendance. In the UK, attendance is so important because it makes sure that we don't lose children. Children that are at risk of missing education are also at risk of abuse and neglect happening to them because we don't know where they are. When children attend school, when they are sat in front of you, that is the most important safeguard that we can have, because we can see them. And if we get to know the child, we build a relationship with them, and we know that they're always in school, we'll also know when there is something not right with them. So if we have children that we don't see, engagement, it is important, very, very important that we know where there are challenges for parents, where parents are struggling to parent their children effectively. An effective safeguard is making sure that those parents have got opportunities to tell members of staff in school that they are struggling. I am struggling to look after my child. I am struggling to keep my child safe. And as schools in the UK, we have mechanisms in place to say, okay, let me signpost you to people that can help you. Let me give you some practical help here. Let's work with the child in school. But what we have to always do, and what safeguarding always do, okay, our safeguarding is underpinned by a document called Keeping Children Safe in Education. and it sets out clearly what we need to be doing. And a lot of that is around curriculum, keeping children safe online. It is our responsibility in schools in the UK to make sure children are aware of risks of going online and perhaps seeing content that is harmful, content that could essentially groom children into abuse, and content that could be extreme or could create radicalisation situations. So it's really important there that the curriculum is taught and there is a curriculum explicitly in place that teaches children about risk. Because what we want is our children to go home and go, I recognise that that isn't okay. I recognise that that isn't right. And that leads us on to the most important safeguarding resource that we've got, which is members of staff in school, which is every adult that children see when they walk through that door in the morning. And what we want from those staff is for those staff to understand that children may need to tell them something that might feel uncomfortable. It might be that as a member of staff in a school, a child comes and tells you something and you don't know what to do with that. A good example of safeguarding is training every member of staff in school how to respond when a child tells you that something is happening and they need you to help them. If we react with shock, or we react with disgust, or we react with any of those things, that child shuts down and won't want to tell you again. And what you then have is a child in a classroom that can't engage with anything that's going on. So safe recruitment is really important as well, making sure that the members of staff that you have in front of your children are the right members of staff to have in front of your children, that are only going to provide positive experiences for children, that are only going to be positive influences and positive role models for those children, because that safeguards children. Also, having policies for bullying, anti-bullying, child protection and other pastoral areas is really important. How do you know if something is not right with a child? How do you know if something is going on for a child? Well, it's steeped in relationship. It's making sure that adults in that school, in those environments, have got relationships with those children that are safe, that are boundaried, that are professional, but children know that they can go to any member of staff and any member of staff will help them. I've put in there about contextual responses as well, because in the UK, I live in an area called the East Midlands, and in the East Midlands, we've got Nottingham, we've got Derby, we've got Leicester, if anybody's ever heard of any of those cities. And the context between the three, we are 20 miles away from each other, but the contexts are very different. Activity, we have lots of children using drugs and substances, and we have lots of violence and knife crime. In Derby, because it's near train station and it's near the motorway, it is county lines where gangs use children in these certain areas to run drugs up and down the country because they're very close to transport. So what's important is that we don't always have a one-size-fits-all to say these are our risks to children. What we have to understand is my school, in my area, in my district, these are the risks to my children here. And it's important that we talk to the community, that we always know what those risks are, because they will not always be the same. They will. And that links into staff training. We need to tell our staff what it is that they need to be looking out for. We need to tell our staff, this is the risk to our children. If we intervene early, we can stop these risks becoming a crisis. We can stop these risks creating a situation where children become significantly harmed. So staff training is huge. It's massive. Child-on-child abuse awareness. Children can abuse other children, and children do abuse each other. And it's recognising that the trauma for children can be just as much by being abused by each other than by being abused by an adult, whether it's somebody that they know or somebody that they don't. So it's being aware that this is causing great trauma in our children. And making sure that we have trauma-informed practice. So when a child walks into a classroom, their behaviour is often trying to tell you something, it's trying to communicate something. It's often a symptom of an underlying cause. Now, if we don't try to work out what that underlying cause is, then what we end up doing is putting a sticking plaster on a broken leg. What we have to try to do is we have to try and pull the cast around the broken leg by understanding what it is that that child needs, and how do we get to the bottom of it, whether it be something that's happening at home, something that's happening in the community. To have children in the classroom that are ready to learn, that are in a situation where they feel that they are able to engage with the content and engage with the teacher, we need to make sure that these children that are coming in that have had traumatic experiences are heard. And that takes me back to something else that really resonated with me in the opening remarks, which is, I see you, we see you. And that's not just the children that have got the SEN diagnosis. It's not just those children that we recognise as being marginalised in an SEN way. It's seeing those children that we don't always know need us to see them. There is things going on for all of our children, or some of our children, that we need to be very, very aware that we just might not know yet. We only know what we know, and safeguarding is about maximising our ability to know as much as possible. Could you just flick onto the... So I just wanted to kind of end my presentation by saying that safeguarding isn't a job that 3 people in one school do. Every single person has a responsibility for safeguarding, and that there is something that everybody can do, and it's a culture. Making it a culture in your school of keeping our children safe, the outcomes of that will be better learners in the classroom. And I'll leave that there.